Welcome to the Albert Clark Show, a transformative podcast where we embark on a profound journey through the key themes of life. Join us as we delve into the rich narratives woven into the works of acclaimed author Albert Lynn Clark, known for his compelling novels Lightning and Thunder, A Miracle Love Story, An Ancient Destiny, Escape from Earth. In each episode, we will explore essential life topics such as miracles, love, hope, loss, destiny, and transformation. Through heartfelt discussions, personal stories, and insightful interviews with guests, Albert will guide us in understanding how these themes shape our lives and connect us to one another. Whether you're seeking inspiration, healing, or a deeper understanding of your own journey, this podcast is designed to resonate with your heart and mind. Tune in as we celebrate the currents of life that unite us all, illuminating the path toward love, hope, and personal growth.
A testament of faith, a beacon of light.
Okay, so I'm going to do something different today. I'm going to go through my most popular books, and I'm going to hold them up in front of my computer here and talk just a little bit about the books and what they are to let you know. This is my Oklahoma Blackjacker book, and it is actually not written by me. My father wrote this book years ago, and this is back before Amazon, and so he had to pay somebody to print it out. He couldn't afford a whole lot, so he used Kinko. And it's basically he used computer paper printed on the printer on an old Commodore 64 before IBM computers or Macintosh got popular. And so he bound the computer pages together and had Kinkos put a cover on it and called it Oklahoma Blackjacker. So a little bit more explanation about it. Oklahoma Blackjacker is somebody that lives in the blackjacks of Oklahoma, and you can see the trees there. And there's the backside. And actually, you can sort of see a water tower in the background. That's my grandfather's old water tower on his farm. And that's on the front cover, there's the gate into the old property. Nobody lives there anymore. The whole square mile is empty of houses, but that's where my grandfather lived. And during the Great Depression, he had a huge fruit farm, and he raised wheat and cows and pigs and everything. And his ice box was an ice box where they delivered ice to his farm almost daily to keep food fresh in the ice box. So, and this was back in the days of wagons bringing the food there. Actually, he bought one of the very first cars in Oklahoma from his profits, but he ended up not being able to drive it because the sandy soil was so bad that they had to haul it in with a horse and he didn't get to drive it much because about the only time he could drive it was after rain when the sand got packed down a little bit by the rain. And so he could drive it when the sand was wet. But if the sand dried out, the tires would sink into the sand and he couldn't move. So anyway, I used to play in the old car back when I was in grade school. And gradually over the years, a fender would disappear here and the hood would disappear there. And eventually the entire car disappeared. And I was still sitting there on a seat with a steering wheel, but nothing else around me for a car. Anyway, uh, there's a lot of interesting stories in that, like how do you move a farmhouse to a different plot of land? They don't have machines, so they used put wheels underneath the house. They jacked up the house, put wheels under, and then hauled it through the forest with mules, cutting down trees as they went and using the tree stumps as pulleys to help the mules move the house. another interesting story from that is while they were doing this, they had left their young daughter with some neighbors, and the daughter disappeared. And the people of the county searched everywhere for 2 weeks and finally gave up. So they had moved into the new house, which they've now got established in a well for water and so forth. And a couple of weeks after they moved in, they heard a bunch of wolves howling nearby. So they went out to see what in the world the mules were doing, and the mules ran off, leaving the daughter sitting there perfectly fine. Anyway, uh, my aunt was always afraid to live by herself after that. Uh, she uh, literally, when her husband died when she was in her 50s, she moved into a nursing home so she wouldn't have to live by herself. That's an interesting story. Also, my father was later on became Oklahoma Teacher of the Year in 1971. And part of the book is talking about how the school systems need to fix the budget. So, anyway, that's that book. This is Nostradamus Arab Spring. And in 1981, I got my first home computer. And I had always wanted to sort out Nostradamus. I'd always been reading about Nostradamus and his picture of the future. And he says in his writing that someday people will figure out the sequence of his uh, quatrains to be able to actually be able to read the future. So he's very famous for having predicted a lot of things back in olden times, because we're talking 1500s. Uh, but he predicted Hitler, he predicted World War II, he predicted a lot of things. Anyway, so I was going through his verses, and I was uh, putting historical things in one pile and things that didn't make sense or sometime in the future in another pile. And my intent was to put them into a database on my computer and have the computer sort things by sequence in which they actually occurred, trying to find out how the sequence of his quatrains was so I could predict the future. Well, it didn't take me too long, and I discovered my pile of future stuff is World War III laying there, just waiting for me to pick it up and write about it. So what I did was I actually, a few years later, and that'll be the next thing I talk about, I wrote a book, and not every chapter, but most chapters start out with a quatrain from Nostradamus, or at least my interpretation of that quatrain. And I'm sure the college professors would disagree with my translation. But anyway, it laid out World War III in such detail, it was amazing. As a matter of fact, there's one section of the book where it was so perfect that I just ran several quatrains together instead of writing fiction about those quatrains. So anyway, so that's a thin book, and every quatrain in there is in the next book I'm going to show you. Okay, this is World War III. It started with EMP by Albert Clark, and you can see the nuclear bomb going off on the front screen. Uh, anyway, in 1986, I was taking Air War College, which is 48 graduate semester hours, and there's a term paper each semester. So the first semester, we were told what to write on, and I got my satisfactory score. It didn't have A, B, C, D, just satisfactory or unsatisfactory. And in the second semester, the last semester, we were given free reign to whatever we thought that the military should be worrying about, because it is Air War College, right? So anyway, uh, so anyway, I did a lot of research. I turned in my 30 or 40 page uh, term paper, and it was rejected by Air War College because it was talking about the Gulf War, and which hadn't happened yet. And Air War College said we would never send tanks and troops to the Middle East. Well, we know how that worked out, because the Gulf War happened. And I was used as a consultant during that war game where the generals would decide how they would proceed to have a war in the Middle East. And I corrected them a few times, like they were planning to put M1 tanks on a C-130 cargo plane and fly them from Northern Europe down to the Middle East. Well, that's not going to work too well because the director of the war game had a demonstration set up where she had a C-130 aircraft parked on the runway, and they drove an M1 tank up behind it to show that the M1 tank was wider than the body of a C-130. Plus the fact she pointed out that this, if you could get the tank on that airplane, it wouldn't have enough power to taxi, let alone take off, because the M1 tank is so heavy, so far above the capability of a C-130. Therefore, the C-17 cargo airplane was purchased at $250 million a piece that will carry one tank and nothing else. A C-5, which is a huge airplane, will carry two tanks. So you're not going to win the war in the Middle East if you try to fly them down there. So they put them on ships. So that was one thing they learned before the war started. And there's several other things that I pointed out that where their tactics were wrong, and they changed their tactics to be what I recommended. And the Russians said it would take uh, 6 months and 600,000 American casualties to get to Baghdad. It took 2 weeks, showing how much better the American military was than the Russians. So, anyway, it was originally called The Price of Peace. And I quit producing that book because the first part of the book was history instead of future history. So I intended this to be future history, and the Gulf War already happened. So why talk about that? Plus, the book was a whole lot thicker. This is not a thin book, it's almost 500 pages, but the old book was 700 pages and too big a book. So I took out the Gulf War and recreated it with a different title, World War III. It started with EMP. It starts out with a person that technically is me, but with a different name. And I'm out in California on a trip out there to help a developmental program build a schedule for development of a new weapon system. That's a 20 or 30-year schedule. What happens is he wakes up, he's getting ready to go home to his home in Ohio to be with his wife and kids. And he wakes up 2 o'clock in the morning and discovers there's no power. So he goes out and looks outside, and there's no lights anywhere in the distance. And he's up on about the 10th floor at total darkness, not a car moving, no street lights, nothing. So he's assuming it's a power failure, right? And he tries to call the desk, but of course the phone doesn't work. And his alarm clock doesn't work. However, he brought an old wind up uh, uh, alarm clock just as a backup in case something happens. He always had it set up, and he'd put it somewhere else in the room where he'd have to get him to go turn it off when it started ringing. Normally, he'd turn it off before it rang, so it wouldn't disturb anybody in the other rooms next to his. But anyway, he checks it, and it says it's 2 o'clock in the morning. But his watch has stopped. Battery powered. Okay, well that's kind of strange. It fails this time. So he makes his way down to the lobby, and there's cars stalled all over the street, just here and there, randomly parked, nothing moving. And about that time, an airplane comes in for landing at the nearby Los Angeles airport, and it has no lights, and the airport has no lights, and the plane crashes across the street next to the runway with a big explosion and a fire and so forth. And no sound other than the crash of the airplane and the burning of the buildings around where it landed, where it crashed. So he realizes that this must be an electromagnetic pulse that's wiped out all the transistors, and maybe the entire the United States has lost all of its transistors all of its electrical power. There will be no police department, no fire department, uh, no alarms, no street lights, no lights anywhere, no cars moving that were built since 1975 because they have transistors somewhere in the system. And older cars, 1975 and older, had carburetors and different kind of ignition system that did not have transistors in it. So an old car might still run, but nothing new will ever operate again because the transistors are burned out. And that means industry is also at a complete total standstill. We can't build new transistors without transistors operating the factories. So we're going to be in big problems real quick. Anyway, that's the beginning of the story, and it goes on uh, through and at the same time they suspect they're not sure who did it, but somebody has set off a nuclear bomb in space 200 or 300 miles above the Earth that wiped out all of our transistors in North America. And it didn't break a window, didn't kill anybody, but starvation is going to end up killing a good portion of the population because farmers can't farm without their tractors that have transistors in them. There's no way to transport food to the cities. And a typical large city has less than 3 days worth of supplies on hand because they have a constant stream of trucks coming in, but there's not going to be any trucks coming in for years, maybe. So anyway, and at the same time, the Middle Eastern countries are trying to take over Europe. They haven't set off an EMP there because they want their equipment to operate. So they're using ordinary conventional forces to overrun the European defenses. And the United States can't help because, hey, we're out of it. So anyway, that's that book. And it's very interesting. There are a lot of countries looking at that book and buying the book and discussions of making movies out of it. Next book. Okay, I'd published a couple of books and I decided I was going to read a science fiction book because, hey, I used to like science fiction. I'd been reading a lot of mystery books because I couldn't find any science fiction books that I liked in recent years. And I went looking again. I still couldn't find anything I liked that was written recently because, Dungeons and Dragons and magic worm warp holes in space and so forth and so on. And I wanted to read true science fiction that, and so I did. Ancient Destiny. This is called Ship. This is the first book, volume one. Ship is an artificial intelligence. I didn't mean to copy 2001: A Space Odyssey with an artificial intelligence, but this is artificial intelligence is very, very beneficial. Its mission is to preserve human life by getting humans off of Earth to other planets before a huge asteroid is going to come and strike Earth and destroy pretty much all of Earth and kill everybody on it. So the problem is that we're look at us today. This book would start in today's time, and we don't have the technology. Traveling to another planet could take centuries. The nearest possible planet is 40 light years away. Well, if you traveled at the speed of light, it'd take you 40 years. But our spaceships travel a couple 100,000 miles an hour versus 186,000 miles per second at the speed of light. And even at the speed of light, it would take 40 years. So if you went half the speed of light, it'd take 80 years. So we're talking generations. People would die of old age before they got there, unless you had a colony ship that was big enough for people to produce their own food and so forth for the entire time you're in space. Uh, and of course, we're talking actually centuries before the first spaceship could get to the nearest planet. And that nearest planet might not be habitable. We don't know yet. So, anyway, the book starts out with a college student who is like a sophomore in college, and he goes to sleep in his dorm room, and he wakes up on a spaceship. And he wakes up and he says, "This isn't right." And he looks around, and there's no furniture, no color. He looks out the window right next to his bed, and he discovers there's a picture of Earth moving by, gradually rotating. This is one strange dream. And he looks back around, and then there's now some furniture appearing in bright colors and so forth. And then this voice comes out of nowhere and says, "Good morning, Captain Craig." What's this Captain Craig bit? My name's Craig, but I'm the captain of nothing. No, you're captain of me, which is the ship. And you can call me Ship, just for short. And I'm an artificial intelligence. Matter of fact, the entire ship is me. I'm in all part of it. I'm not just a computer chip sitting somewhere. I'm the ship, and I have artificial intelligence, and I've been orbiting the Earth for thousands of years. Previous captains of the ship were Aristotle and Pythagoras, and more recently, somebody like Tesla. And they have been captains of the ship, and they all have the same mission, and that is to advance science of humanity to be able to escape the Earth. Well, we're out of time. I can't pick a current scientist that's already famous, so I picked a college student that has no uh, confirmed uh, background that can go with the flow, basically, and maybe come up with something new. So you're the captain. And to give you a complete picture, if you will come in here to the control room, I'll uh, lower this thing that looks like a hair dryer over your head and telepathically tell you all about what's going on, the history of the ship, the history of Earth, as we know it, and the problem we've got facing us. So he does, and half hour later, his mind is programmed with all this information, and he may not remember all of it, but Ship says that he will always be telepathically connected. So if somebody asks you a question, you'll be able to answer it from my memory as well as your own memory. Okay, he says. So you expect me to move science from, gee, right now it takes us 6 months to get to the moon. I mean, to get to Mars. It takes days to get to the moon, which is orbiting the Earth. And you're expecting me to move masses of humanity to other planets and other solar systems somewhere in our galaxy? Yes, that's the mission. I need help. Well, you can't have help because my programming only allows one captain of the ship. And Aristotle did a pretty good job, but technology could only go so far. Tesla tried a whole bunch of things, but he kept pushing technology beyond what humanity was capable of. Well, it's your turn. Look, I get some help? Well, no, you'll have to do this on your own. He says, why are there 7 chairs at that dining room table? Well, that's for your 6 concubines. That doesn't seem to pause for a minute. What do you mean concubines? We don't have concubines anymore. Women have moved far beyond that. He says, well, historically, from throughout my history, which goes back to before Earth was even created, uh, we had concubines for men to keep them entertained. Well, I don't need concubines. I need scientists. So what I want is to fill those other 6 chairs. I want 6 specialists in different career fields to help me build this new science that we're going to have to have. And how long do you say I had? About 4 years. 4 years. You want me to move from spaceships that travel 100,000 miles an hour to spaceships that travel faster than the speed of light? I thought the speed of light was impossible. Well, no, it's a matter of when you hit the speed of light, you convert to energy, but when you slow back down, you go back to being matter again. What happens while I'm in above the speed of light? Well, you won't know it because the ship all around you, everything you see is inside the ship is going the same speed you are, so you don't know you're traveling fast. Okay. So anyway, that's book one. And he starts out by trying to find scientists that are women that are close to his age that are experts in their field. And it turned out to be more than one book. It turned into be four books. So anyway, the next book, Escape from Earth, they actually get ships built all around the world, different countries building different ships, but they're all designed with exactly the same specifications. One of the members of the crew is the training specialist who trains the crewmen that are going to be on these colony ships. Well, before they can do that, naturally they're going to have to. He's got a couple of women working with him now, navigating in space. Something that very unusual, but she's working on her PhD and she's only 20 years old and she's very pretty. Anyway, so they start experimenting with what ship can do and find out a lot of things that's pretty amazing, that totally impossible. But then that's science fiction, right? You have to embrace total impossibility. And of course, one of the things they're going to have to do is they're going to have to find planets that are habitable by humans. Well, you can't just go to any old planet because, first place, they're a long ways away, but the ship has no limits on how fast it can go. It uses artificial gravity, so it repels from Earth and it tracks toward other mass somewhere in the universe, and it doesn't accelerate like on Star Trek. If you can go from 0 to warp 10 in the Star Trek, all the crew members would be plastered to the back of the ship as goo. Well, you're traveling in an anti-gravity ship. It has artificial gravity, so you can walk around just like you're on Earth. And when the ship accelerates, you don't feel it because you're part of the ship. So it's just like a fly that can fly around in an airplane at 600 miles an hour. Well, flies don't fly 600 miles an hour unless they're in an airplane, and they can be on a supersonic airplane flying at Mach 2, and here comes the fly flying around the face mask. Anyway, so you're inside the ship. You don't feel acceleration. You don't tell you're going that fast, except if you look out one of the windows, you will see planets going by. You'll see stars flying by. So anyway, they go exploring, looking for other planets that we can habitate. We can send colony ships there, and they can create colonies. Well, what do you need to have a colony? So the book goes into details about what do you take with you? What do you live on while you're traveling there? Ship, no problem. But our spaceships that we create for colony ships, yes, they can go faster than the speed of light, but it's going to take months to get anywhere in particular. So the planets they find are spaced out in just a small area of our galaxy. But they find planets that are not habitable and planets that are habitable. And of course, the ship has amazing sensors that even though it's flying by it faster than the speed of light, it might detect a planet that has the right conditions, where it detects air, detects water, it detects temperature that is reasonable, and it can stop instantly, and you won't even feel it because you're part of the ship. Just like that fly doesn't go flying to the front of the airplane when the airplane slows down. It still keeps flying around in the airplane even when the pilot's got the brakes on during landing. Uh, so it might feel some deceleration, but in the ship you don't feel anything other than the fact that things quit flying by the windows and you're stopped. And so then they go down and can explore those planets to see whether they're truly habitable by humans. And in the meantime, uh, uh, they are training crewmen back on Earth to take those colony ships and go on a several month voyage to one of the planets that you find that are habitable by humans. Craig and his crew of 6 women uh, picked several planets because uh, there's no point in having warring people going to the same planet and having the war continue on another planet. Um, in this case, China is the bad actor, and instead of doing what they're supposed to do, they send military people and military equipment instead of farming equipment, and with the idea that they're going to take over whoever else is on that same planet, and they will be the rulers. Well, that's not going to work too well because they're going to their own planet, and but there's a lot of people of different nationalities who might be on the same ship. For instance, the United States is not just British background, not just German background, but we've got a background of Jewish and Arab and black and white and disregarding that, there's another requirement for our colony ships. Again, just like the ship have 6 women and 1 man, the colony ships will also have 6 women per man on board the ship. Again, the women have the technical capability to fly the ship and get there where you're going and learn how to do farming and things like that. But it does take men too. Uh, they don't need the physical strength, especially in flight, because everything in the ship is automated on the colony ships. And these are huge colony ships. For taking off from Earth, they use multiple ICBMs uh, tacked onto the hull of the ship to accelerate the ship to get out into space, and then nuclear power takes over from there. But anyway, I'll explain that in the book. You'll have to study that, see whether it's feasible or not. But I had to come up with a reason. How in the world can you fly faster than the speed of light unless you use some kind of acceleration method that is faster than the speed of light? If you have something coming out of the back of the ship that's coming out fast, even though you're at light speed, you're going to gain speed further above the light speed. Okay, well, I try to handle that in the book, but you got to read the book to figure that out. Uh, so anyway, another reason is that women eat less, so they don't need as many supplies. They don't breathe as much air because they're smaller, and therefore they don't have to have as much air production on board the ship because the ship is going to have to produce its own air. There are no now our nuclear submarines, for instance, can stay under the sea for months at a time because they use seawater to make fresh water, and they use hydrolysis to create hydrogen and oxygen, which freshens the oxygen on board the ship and on the submarine. But we have nothing outside our colony ship except space. Nothing. Zero. There's dark energy and dark matter that the scientists say make up a lot of what's out there in space. But that's not something we can pump in and turn into water or air. So anyway, these 6 women per man fly to another planet. They land on the planet and start building houses. For a while, they can live on board the ship, but then they need to start building houses and farms and find natural resources like fossil fuels and iron ore or whatever to make things out of. Cut down trees for houses and whatever. Uh, but there's another reason why I have 6 women per man. And I'm not Mormon, but the Mormons had their good idea in that when they came to Salt Lake City to create a new Mormon colony, they had more women than men because women can produce children. And if you have 6 women per man, That means each man is going to have 6 wives, and they can have 6 times as many children as one woman can. So therefore, we can rapidly increase the population of that new colony. Next book in the series is called World War III Generations. And what that amounts to is there's going to be generations of people living on those ships, living on those planets as we colonize them. And so it talks about that's our first contact with an alien intelligence. We have our first conflict where there's a possibility of having a war. Uh, we do more explorations. We gradually develop our resources on these colonies. And then everything gets pretty well settled down. And by the way, there's a couple of women on Craig's ship where he only had six women. One of them changed their mind, decided they like this colony really well, and they want to be a normal colonist instead of on the ship constantly exploring. One advantage of being on the ship is because uh, when you're on the ship, because of, and I explain this in the book, but you don't age very fast. So where the story takes 30 years, the women on board and Craig on board the ship only aged 3 or 4 years. So they're still young women and men in their 20s now, and even though they've been traveling around for 30 years, people on colonies will age normally. Anyway, one of the women decides she wants to be an ordinary woman and have children and live on a planet and quit traveling around doing risky things. So she leaves the ship, and that means that Craig has to find a replacement for her on board the ship. And of course, again, as they've gotten more experience, they need different specialties on board the ship. So they need different people. Another crew member. We have one planet that's having a lot of political problems. They can't seem to get the story straight. They keep losing focus because people being power hungry and wanting to be king of the planet. So she leaves the ship with all of her knowledge that she's gained from the ship to lead that planet. So she becomes president of a local planet and leaves the ship. So there's another replacement that Craig has to find for on board the ship. And then we have the fourth book, Survivors. What do you mean, survivors? Well, 20 something years after they left Earth, they went back to Earth and they found that there were some people survived in South Texas, southern part of the United States, where it was warmer, because basically they ended up with a new ice age after the impact of the asteroid on Earth that created a dust cloud that covered the Earth for a year or two. But some people survived. And they're trying to rebuild civilization from their poor viewpoint. And the ship finds them and provides some help to them. And also, there's another story that runs throughout the 4 books that you may not even realize the story, but I talk about where did the people of Atlantis come from? Did Atlantis just suddenly be an advanced civilization? No, they came there from Mars because Mars lost their atmosphere. And so they moved to Earth, which had an atmosphere. So the Atlantans came here as a small colony from the survivors of Mars losing its atmosphere, and they moved to Earth. However, they left again and they went up because of the Great Flood. They knew it was coming, and they saw it happening, and so they evacuated as many people as possible from Atlantis to the stars again to go look for another planet to live on. And a lot of us that are left over are descendants of Atlantis, and they had to leave us behind because they didn't have enough room on the ships. And where the story about Noah, well, no, we didn't come to total extinction in the Great Flood, and Noah was not the only survivor of the Great Flood. But every city on Earth that was near a body of water is now under 400 feet of water. About 12,000 years ago, when the glaciers melted rapidly, and there's an explanation for that too, of course. But anyway, the glaciers melted rapidly, and everything that was less than 400 feet above sea level is now 400 feet under sea level. And there's evidence of that all over the planet. And there were advanced civilizations, but they lost everything. But there were people higher in the hills that were not under 400 feet, and they were survivors also. And that's where our current human race came from, is the people from Atlantis and the survivors that survived the Great Flood. And yeah, Noah and his family were part of that, but there was a very small number of people versus uh, and again animals, where maybe Noah had two of each kind of animal except for unicorns. uh, but and there's a song about that. And but there are other animals and birds and fish, of course, that survived the Great Flood because they weren't underwater. So plains animals that were in low plains maybe got found in the flood. But there were other animals that were roaming the high hills in Colorado and in the mountains, 6,000 feet above sea level, that survived just fine. And that's the current animals we have here on the planet today, along with Noah's animals. Uh, anyway, so uh, that's the main books that I have produced. I've got other books. I've got other books I want to write. But right now, I need to try to make some money on the books that I've already written. And to let you know where I get my income, I'm retired military. I retired as a lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Air Force, and then I went to work for the Air Force as a civilian, and I retired from that too. And then I went back to work for the Air Force as a contractor, working for a company that was working for the Air Force. And then I retired and decided to write books. Now, my World War III book, I wrote that while I was still working because I wanted to get that message out to people that we need to prepare for World War III. We need to prepare to lose all of our transistors. Uh, so the preppers out there uh, have a book to warn them about what's coming and let them figure out how they're going to survive this uh, total loss of our civilization in the United States and Canada and Mexico. So all my books are written for purpose. My Ancient Destiny series, for instance, talks about artificial intelligence, which is a big hot topic right now. But I wrote the book in 2012. I wrote the series in 2012. I want to promote women, and throughout the book series, as they meet other civilizations, one of their missions is to promote women within that civilization, to realize that they're losing half their brain power by not using women as for their brains, not just for their bodies. So that's throughout the book. And then, of course, there's the background story of Atlantis, which we see where did Atlantis come from, and that's explained. And they actually moved from another planet to Mars first, and then they moved to Earth, and then they left again, and they've created a new civilization. And basically, but I won't tell you the rest of the story. You'll have to read book 4 to figure out what happened to Atlantis. So anyway, that's the history, and my main income is just my retirement checks. I get military and civilian retirement checks plus Social Security, which is not a whole lot of money, but I've been using that to promote my books, and now I'm hoping to sell enough books to get back to where I was before I started spending money on promoting my books. So, which I just started last September. Before that, I was very comfortably retired with money in the bank and no worries. So, uh, and now I'm broke. So I need to get a big contract to sell these things as movies or sell them as a big book company where I can get you know, big royalties from those book companies or whatever. So read my books. Of course, my love story. Again, there I'm trying to promote the fact that uh, getting married is supposed to be a lifetime event. My parents and my parents-in-law were married for over 60 years, and they were still happily married when they died. And that's how it should be. You're not supposed to be married for 2 or 3 years and decide, oh, I see something better. The grass is greener on the other side of the fence. No, that's not how it's supposed to work. Anyway, I'm hoping you'll read my love story and realize that maybe I need to look around and be more careful. So anyway, that's it. That's the end of this video. Bye.
Lighten